Chapter 31. Training. Ernie never slowed down. James felt his seatbelt straining to one side as the truck took a hard turn off the tarmac onto a dirt track, marked out by nothing except the marks laid by vehicles that had gone before it. There was a house and a large outbuilding on the horizon. "You been here before?" James asked. Ernie nodded. "I drop their mail by once a week. Couple of American fellas, but it sounds like they're shipping out pretty soon." "What do they do out here?" James asked. "They make paint." James looked surprised. "Why make paint in the middle of the outback?" Ernie shrugged. "It's pretty easy to get Australian citizenship if you agree to start a business in the outback. Brian showed me around once. It's a good little business. They're not churning out 5-litre tubs of emulsion. It's all very specialised. Natural pigments and stuff for restorative paintings and antiques." "How come you collect their mail for them?" "You're a curious little Dickens this morning, ain't ya?" said Ernie. "I think they're friends with Susie, or something." "Just making conversation," James said, giving a couldn't-care-less shrug. James realised he couldn't push any further without seeming suspicious. It took 5 more minutes of Ernie's psycho driving to reach the buildings. The house looked as if it had stood for decades, but the windowless rectangle next door was a recent addition. It was built from prefabricated sections with a corrugated metal roof. Ernie blasted the horn as James flung open his door and jumped out of the cab. It was getting close to the hottest part of the day, and he had flies swarming around within a second of his feet touching the red dust. "They must be around here somewhere," Ernie said, craning his neck to look behind the building. "I'll try the workshop. You see if they're in the house." As Ernie jogged off towards the concrete shed, James stepped onto a wooden porch and rapped on a screen door. "Anybody home?" He pushed the door open and found himself in a kitchen. There were a couple of suitcases on the floor and boxes packed with cutlery and utensils stacked up on the countertops. "Hello?" James yelled. As he stepped further into the house, James noticed a few photographs tacked on the fridge door. Most of them were regular scenes. 2 little dudes wearing armbands beside a swimming pool, a school photograph, an elderly couple sitting in a restaurant at some sort of family event. But one of the pictures made him gasp. Oh shit. James instantly recognised the little lad who stood on a pebble beach on a drizzly English day. James had met him 2 years earlier on his first Cherub mission. His name was Gregory Evans, and his father was Brian Bungle Evans, a Texan biologist and a member of Help Earth who tried to kill 200 oil executives and politicians with deadly anthrax bacteria. Brian was one of the world's most wanted men, but he'd never been found. Nor had the laboratory or any of the equipment used to manufacture the anthrax. James's brain raced. Everything made sense. Ernie said that one of the men who lived here was called Brian, and paint production involves mixing up chemicals, making it a perfect cover for a facility that produced biological weapons or explosives. This was a big result. Uncovering the Help Earth laboratory would be front-page news all around the world, but James faced a massive problem. He'd met Brian Evans on several occasions when he'd been working in Wales under the name of Ross Lee. As soon as Brian saw James's face, his cover would be blown apart. James felt his stomach shrink into a tight ball, knowing things could turn nasty any second. He realised that the best strategy was to grab hold of the biggest weapon he could find and he figured there would be knives in one of the cardboard boxes on the table. But before he had a chance to grab anything, he heard footsteps and a voice with a familiar Texas twang. "Hi there, son." After breakfast, Dana, Barry, Eve, and Nina headed off to train for their attack. Barry took them to a deserted stretch of beach in a Subaru wagon, towing a 3-meter dinghy behind the car. They pulled up on a stretch of squishy sand. There was a strong breeze, and the sea looked choppy. Once the 4 of them had hauled the dinghy off the trailer, Barry and the girls sat on the edge of their car seats and changed into wetsuits. Nina stayed behind with the car as the others set out to sea. As the shore receded and the outboard motors threw up a giant wash, Barry began speaking in a monotonous voice. "What you're going to learn this morning is not complicated, but you must listen or we'll fail in our operation tonight." He started off explaining how to use the twin outboard motors and gave each girl a few minutes practice steering the boat and controlling the throttle. Next, he pulled out a couple of GPS receivers and showed the girls how to use them for navigation. He gave Eve a set of coordinates from a waterproof chart and told her to find it. A 5-year-old can navigate with a GPS, and it took less than 10 minutes to reach their target. A natural harbour shielded from the waves by 2 lines of jutting rocks. The water was clear, and the upturned hull of a recently stricken motor launch shimmered a couple of meters beneath the surface. "Okay, cut the power," Barry said. "Put the GPS back in its pouch and pay attention." Barry unzipped a backpack and pulled out 3 chunky metal discs. "It's not easy to sink a large boat," Barry began. "When you're talking about something that weighs over 100,000 tons, with watertight compartments and a double hull, you're either going to need a whole boat packed with explosives crashing into it at speed, or you've got to position your explosives very carefully." "What about oil spills?" Dana asked. "Help Earth only attacks empty tankers, but they've really upped the security. Every navy in the world is keeping tabs on them. This time, we're trying a different tack and going for LNG." "LN what?" Eve asked. "Liquid natural gas. This region has some of the world's largest natural gas deposits. Japan, on the other hand, has no natural gas of its own, but is the world's 2nd largest consumer of the stuff. Natural gas explodes under high pressure, so the only way to move it over long distances is by chilling it to about 70 below zero, when it turns into a liquid. It has to stay at that temperature until it reaches its destination. The liquefaction process has to be done in a special facility that costs billions of dollars to construct. Then it's shipped off in refrigerated tankers that cost another $100 million a pop to build." "Big bucks," Dana grinned. "I've never even heard of the stuff." Barry nodded. "You won't meet a lot of people who have, but LNG is a massive industry. Not only does an attack on an LNG facility hit the oil companies in the wallet, the exploding gas burns cleanly and does little lasting damage to the environment." Dana smiled. "No oil slicks or gooey blackbirds then?" "That's right." "You said facility," Dana said. "I thought we were going for a tanker." Barry nodded. "If you take out the boat when it's refueling, the explosion will take a nice chunk of the terminal with it." Dana looked solemn. "But if we get caught, they'll lock us up and throw away the key." Eve hit Dana on the back and spoke furiously. "Don't say that. Don't even think that. It's so negative. We're survivors. We have honest souls and God will protect us." James turned anxiously to face Brian Evans. But it wasn't him. Same accent, similar face, but a younger-looking dude with curly hair. "Name's Mike," the man said. "You here with my man Ernie?" James nodded. "I see you're admiring the picture of my little nephew." "Yeah, he's cute," James said. "That's Brighton, isn't it? I recognize the pier in the background." "I wouldn't know. It's my brother that married the Limey girl." "Are you from England?" "Nah, but I've lived there for most of the last 3 years." "Certainly picked up the accent. You sound like a genuine Cockney boy." Ernie came in through the screen door wearing his usual smile. "So, you found each other. Didn't you hear the truck arrive, Mike?" Mike nodded. "The screeching brakes and the blasting horn were a giveaway, but I was up in the roof fetching down some boxes of documents." "Brian not here?" Ernie asked. "He'll be landing back at the Ark this evening and running a few final errands before shipping out himself," Mike said, to James's massive relief. "Well, I sure hope your business takes off down south," Ernie said. "I'll miss chatting with you guys." "Thank you kindly," Mike nodded. "We've got customers all over the world. I reckon we'll do all right." He turned and looked at James. "I hope you've got some good muscles on you, young fella. Gonna work up a sweat clearing out that workshop." Ernie smiled at James. "You don't need to worry about the boy. You should see him throwing my mail sacks around. Tough as a bull, ain't you, son?" James hated it when adults patronized him, but he couldn't help smiling at being compared to a bull. Dana sat on the edge of the dinghy and flopped backwards into the water, clasping the metal can to her chest. This was her 5th practice, but her first wearing a near-black visor designed to simulate diving at night. Even in the bright sunlight, all she could see was a mass of gloomy outlines. She swam 4 strokes with one arm before pulling up and going into a doggy paddle. She felt around with her toes and was reassured to feel the sunken white bow beneath her feet. It hadn't even been underwater long enough to rust. After a couple of deep breaths to oxygenate her blood, Dana tipped forwards and plunged blindly underwater. As her fingers felt along the metal hull, she pulled the heavy can away from her chest. Its powerful magnetic base took on its own momentum and clamped itself to the hull with a hollow thunk. She sensed a rush of water from some unseen sea creature disturbed by the noise. Once the dummy bomb was in position, she fumbled until she found a switch, which was locked in place with a steel pin to prevent accidental activation. Dana was getting desperate for breath, but she knew it would be a nightmare relocating the device after surfacing, so she stayed under. It was always fiddly getting the pin out, and not being able to see made it harder. When it finally twisted away, Dana flipped the switch and kicked her feet against the hull, filling her lungs with air as her face broke the surface. The boat had drifted a few meters, meaning she faced a longer swim back. She grasped the rope on the side of the dinghy, expecting to clamber back aboard, but found Barry holding another dummy bomb in her face. "Not too bad," Barry said firmly, "but you've got to release the charge slowly. I heard that magnetic thunk against the hull from up here. Remember, there might be people standing on deck 20 or 30 meters above your head. They would have heard a noise like that." "People you're happy to kill," Dana thought to herself, as she sighed and swept a strand of hair away from her face. "Let me catch my breath for a second." Barry shook his head. "Get back out there. You've got to make 3 dives in rapid succession tonight, so you'd better get used to it."